Welcome everyone tonight, and I'm glad that we're here. Thank you for the World War II veterans and other veterans that are here tonight, and all the rest of you, thank you for taking your time to be here as well on this evening. We have David Shorter as our main speaker, and Richard Weaver, World War II veteran, sitting up front here, but we'll get to more of them later. We do want to remind you to please turn off your phones and keep them on silent during the meeting, or turn them off so that we don't have ringtones and things during the meeting tonight. Also, the helmet committee is in the back, so they will welcome any donations you might have. We do sometimes have speaker expenses and things that we have to prepare for monetarily wise, and your donations will help in that regard. So I want to start things off to have our friend Kirk Gibson, former president, come and do the Pledge of Allegiance, and then we'll have a few more words. Thank you, Kirk.
Please join me for the pledge. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Airborne.
And of course, Kirk was in the Airborne as well, so he knows what he's talking about. Thanks, guys, for being here once again. And now to get started, I want to announce actually next month's speaker and the December speaker. So let's get that out of the way here. So November speaker, November 3rd, will be Jack McSherry. Jack McSherry, he's a Navy veteran, World War II veteran actually. And he was in a destroyer, I believe, and he hunted Nazi submarines there in the Atlantic Ocean, the Battle of the Atlantic he was in. And then for December 1st meeting, we have Larry Alexander, and he is a historian and author. He's written about 4 or 5 books on World War II. Before that, he had a full career as a journalist, actually, and he was actually nominated for a Pulitzer Prize for journalism, so that's pretty impressive right there. And he wrote, the book he'll be presenting on in December for us is called Biggest Brother, about Dick Winters, a famous Hershey celebrity who was a Hershey, Pennsylvania resident, World War II veteran. And I was honored enough to meet him back in the 90s. Actually, I met him in Gettysburg and talked to him there and saw him speak actually in the Gettysburg World War II weekend in Gettysburg. Okay, guys, so I'm going to let our board member Patty do the main introduction, but I'm just going to say a few words of welcome first to David Short, an Army veteran of 20-some years. He's very proud that he worked his way up into the officer ranks as a warrant officer. He has a BS college degree as well. He's also the curator of the Veterans Museum in Germantown, Ohio. He drove all the way here. I was just talking to him, 7+ hours here, so we're honored that he did that. He's going to do his best to talk tonight after that long drive for us. And we have Richard Weaver here, World War II 17th Airborne Division veteran. So David will be talking about the 17th Airborne Division of World War II. We're honored to have an actual veteran of that organization, of that unit, here with us tonight. And so now I will turn it over to our board member, Patty Bowers, and I will give her the microphone, or if she has her own, she can use that one. Thank you.
Good evening. It's an honor to be here tonight. Our illustrious speaker or guest here, Mr. Richard James Weaver, was born July 25th, 1924 in Gettysburg, Pennsylvania, one of 13 children. He volunteered to join the United States Army, and he enlisted at 18 years of age in January 1943. Mr. Weaver volunteered for airborne training and earned his jump wings on June 22nd, 1944, as a part of the 17th Airborne, and departed for England in August of 1944. He was assigned to the Division Headquarters Company and first saw combat with the 17th when they were brought into action in what became known as the Battle of the Bulge. Mr. Weaver fought and served with the 17th until the end of the war, and this time he returned home with thousands of other comrades aboard the RMS Queen Elizabeth docking in New York City. And in early 1946, he was in the parade. Richard marched in that victory parade with the Division Headquarters Company of the 82nd Airborne and in plain sight of General James Jumping Jim Gavin. Mr. Weaver, as Rich, as he is referred to by most of all who know him, settled into civilian life, marrying the first and only love, Jean Smith, and together they had 11 children and raised 2 foster children. Mr. Weaver owned and operated a plaster business and has been very active and a part of the Bonneville community where he was born and raised, which is just outside of Gettysburg. He's been a long-life member of St. Joseph, the Worker Catholic Church, and a deacon of the diocese for over 40 years. To this day, he is active in the church, giving homilies, visiting the sick, bringing communion to the elderly unable to attend church, and sometimes likes to fish. David Short, my dear friend, is from Germantown, Ohio, and he brought along with him Tom Dunn, his assistant. David is a retired United States Army Chief Warrant Officer who served worldwide in the Airborne Infantry in reconnaissance, a pathfinder, an air assault instructor, a heavy weapons instructor, CID special agent, and intelligence analyst roles from 1979 to 2004. David also served during 9/11 during the terrorist attack at the Pentagon during the Cold War on the West German border, assignments, and during the invasion of Panama and Iraq. He also served for 15 years in the police crime scene and polygraph assignments. David currently is the curator of the Veterans Memorial Museum Foundation in Germantown, Ohio, a 501(c) nonprofit organization devoted to preserving the history and sacrifice of America's armed forces from the American Revolution and the global war on terror, with an emphasis on the 17th Airborne Division. Lastly, David is a member and current historian for the 17th Airborne Division Scions. David's uncle, Kenneth Short, was served with the 17th Airborne as well. David also holds a BS from the University of New York. He has devoted his life to preserving the military history for our children and grandchildren so they never forget the sacrifices made by the brave men and women of our armed forces who afforded them the freedoms that they enjoy today. David honors all veterans he has the privilege to meet and takes a genuine interest in their lives, and has even become a part of their extended family as a friend, confidant, and in some cases, even their caregiver. He attends their funerals and makes sure they have military honors and that they are never forgotten. As for me, my father, Thomas Miller, was also in the 17th Airborne Division. He was my hero, and I, as well as every other child of a World War II veteran, is a descendant of nobility. We were born of greatness because of our fathers. My father, like most World War II veterans, rarely ever spoke of his time in World War II, with the exception of when he went to a reunion with his buddies. So when he passed in 2012, I wanted to know more about his service, and I found there was an organization called the Scions of the 17th Airborne. What Scion means is descendants. And when the men of the 17th could no longer hold their annual reunions, the children decided to get a charter, start an organization. We hold the reunions for the veterans now, and it is our mission to remember, honor, and teach about their service. And we make sure that no veteran from the 17th Airborne is unrepresented at their funeral. We make sure we go with a division flag, and we make sure that they are never forgotten. There's a contingent of Scions that are not with us tonight because they're currently down in Fayetteville dedicating a memorial to General Miley, the father of the Airborne. We travel to retrace our father's footsteps through Europe. We try to go every year. And again, we just want to make sure that none of these men are ever forgotten. And if you need any more information on our organization, feel free to contact me after the meeting. And now I'll turn it over to David.
You can't. Now can you? First of all, I'd like to, how many World War II veterans do we have here tonight? If you're a World War II veteran, raise your hand. We owe, our nation owes your a debt. Richard, our nation owes them a debt of gratitude that can never be repaid, period. So it's an honor to have you gentlemen here tonight. I'm kind of a weird kind of orator. I like to walk. I don't like to sit under the spotlight and sweat and worry about what to say and all that. So I'm going to be on the move a lot, but I will start up here. Would you like to say anything before we begin, Mr. Weaver, about the 17th Airborne Division? Would you like to say anything at all about the 17th Airborne Division? We'll ask questions here in a moment. How's that? We drove 7.5 hours to get here today, and I'm very fatigued. So if I make a boo-boo, you got to forgive me for that, okay? First of all, how many people in here are veterans? Outstanding. Let's give them all a hand. Yeah. My own understanding is that soldiers and farmers built this country. That's my belief. How many of you have heard of the 70th Airborne Division? How many of you know anything about the 17th Airborne Division? We got a few. How many airborne soldiers do we have in here today? Great. I love it. Always outnumbered, but never outclassed. All right. Outstanding. So I look like I'm 100 years old, but I'm really not. I spent 23 years in the Army, and I spent 15 with the police, and I'm on my second wife. So I think the latter part of that probably is where the age comes from. But I'm going to read something to you here. I'm going to try. On the way over, my glasses broke, so bear with me. Congratulations on your acceptance into a combat organization. You have elected to enter an elite fighting corps, an airborne division. We can tolerate no weaklings. You must set yourself into a new and difficult routine. The notes that follow here are to assist you. Then there's pages of administrative guidance. That is dated April 6, 1943, at Camp McCall, North Carolina. That's when all the kids arrived. Here we go. There's a little bit of delay here. When, in April 1943, the train pulled up to Hoffman, North Carolina. Anybody ever been to Hoffman, North Carolina? Hoffman, North Carolina is a Special Forces assessment and training selection area. It's about 30 miles from Fort Bragg, North Carolina. There are about 2 streets left there, 3 streets. One is named 11th Airborne Division Street, one is named 13th Airborne Division Street, and one is named 17th Airborne Division Street. During World War II, the United States had 5 airborne divisions: the 11th, the 13th, the 17th, the 82nd, and 101st, which everybody hears about. We also had independent regiments and battalions: the 517th Parachute Infantry Regiment, the 550th Airborne Battalion, the 509th Parachute Battalion. Anybody ever heard of those guys? They had the most combat jumps in World War II and the most campaigns. You never hear anything about them. They had 40 survivors in the Battle of the Bulge. Also, the 551st Parachute Battalion from Panama. So, in April 1943, the trains pulled up. The young men got off, mostly from Pennsylvania, Ohio, West Virginia, and New York. Most of the members of the 70th Airborne Division came from those 4 states. The replacements came from all over the United States. So the 17th truly has a Pennsylvania connection. I think there was more members of the 17th from Pennsylvania than there were all the other 3 states. The sad thing is when you go to Europe and you go to the cemeteries, look at the states that they're all from. Generally those 4 states. So the numbers correlated, the fallen correlated with the numbers that served. So what I read to you All the kids that got off the train, and I say kids, they're 18, 19-year-old drafts, this is what they were read. Charles Davis from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, along with his twin brother, Albert, were both standing at that train station. Albert looked at Charles and said, what the hell is an, excuse me, church? What the heck is an airborne division? So, the way the division formed was unlike today where the Army relies on replacements. They began a selection process. They tested everybody. If, depending on your score, you went into the infantry, the artillery, the radio, the communications, you went into the ordnance, you went into the military police. Once you were assigned to those units, that's where you began your training. You did your individual basic training as part of that unit. You trained at platoon level, at company level, a battalion level if your unit had a battalion. And they began forming the units. And the training was not for the faint of heart. Charles Davis told me that they ran everywhere. There was no walking in the airborne. You had to run. And when you started out, everybody was required to be a glider soldier. You could not refuse to be a glider soldier. Later on, many of them, including Mr. Weaver, became parachutists. And also, many of the parachute infantry regiments went to training at Fort Benning, Georgia for their parachute training. But we'll talk a little bit about that. But some of the units that were formed, the division had about 14,000 men, starting with 385 vehicles. What do you think the most common vehicle in an airborne division is? A Jeep, because it's transportable by glider. The trucks, they had a few 2.5-ton trucks, a few 1.5-ton trucks, Jeep trailers, but predominantly the Jeep was a predominant vehicle because it could be transported in a CG-4A Waco or Waco glider. Anybody know where the Wacos were made? Troy, Ohio. All right. So, starting out with the Airborne Division Headquarters Company, Mr. Weaver was in the headquarters company. General Miley, the assistant divisional commander, the divisional commander for artillery, and their staffs, G1, 2, 3, and 4. Also, various support personnel, including security personnel, drivers, intelligence analysts, and all that. The next group is the Airborne Reconnaissance Platoon. This is a very elite unit. It's only about 30 men. They were glider. They had 4 to 5 Jeeps, and their job was to do long-range reconnaissance for the 17th Airborne Division. The 194th Glider Infantry Regiment had 2 battalions to begin with, had a glider artillery battalion attached, the 681st. The 193rd Glider Infantry Regiment had 2 infantry battalions. Later on, it had an artillery battalion attached. The 513th Parachute Infantry Regiment was the initial parachute element of the division. They were called the Black Cats. They formed on the 13th on a Friday. Their pocket patch was a big 13 with a black cat, and they loved to jump. 17th Division Headquarters Battery, that was the artillery headquarters staff. The 680th Glider Field Artillery was a 105 millimeter howitzer battalion. The others were 75 pack howitzers. The 155th Anti-Aircraft Anti-Tank Battalion was a heavy weapons unit with later on recoilless rifles, anti-tank guns, and anti-aircraft guns. The 139th Airborne Engineering Battalion, which my great uncle served in, was the division's demolition and construction element. They had dump trucks, but they weren't able to bring them in by air. They had a lot of Jeeps too. The military police platoon, they were pretty busy with the 17th. The 224th Airborne Medical Company, the 570th Airborne Signal Company, the Parachute Maintenance Company, the Ordnance Company, and the Quartermaster Company. Now what's interesting about an airborne division in World War II was they were either glider or parachute. The fighting regiments were either one or the other, except for the glider regiments. Some of the guys were parachute and glider qualified, but the units served in a glider capacity. And the support units, They were a mixture of parachutists and glidermen. The Davis twins from Pittsburgh, one was a gliderman and one was a parachutist in the signal company. So the 513th was assigned from the 13th Airborne Division to the 17th before they went overseas. And the 193rd Gliding Infantry Regiment was deactivated after the Battle of Bulge, which we'll talk about. So as I mentioned, Pennsylvania, New York, West Virginia, and Ohio. Ed, would you please tell me when we're at 45 minutes? As I said, they were trained as parachutists and glidermen. The 17th Airborne Division had their own jump school at Camp Forest, Tennessee. In 1944, if you were a non-parachutist, you were allowed to volunteer for the parachute school. The parachutists got $50 a month. What'd you get when you went in the Army for parachute pay? And what year was that? What year did you go in? 61, he got $5 more. In 1979, I got $5 more, $55 a month. So let's talk a little bit about the training. So the 17th, as I said, trained as individuals, individual combat training up to platoon, company, squad, and then you have to assess that. They have to have battalion exercises and regimental exercises. And ultimately it culminated in the Tennessee maneuvers in 1944. Mr. Weaver, do you remember the Tennessee maneuvers?
I sure do.
What do you remember about it?
We didn't like it.
It was cold, wasn't it? Didn't it snow and rain? Yeah. So in 1944, the division had to be assessed by the Army to determine whether it was prepared enough to go overseas to fight. So the 17th was spread all over Tennessee in a big maneuver there, and they did very well. But what's interesting is it's anywhere the Airborne goes, the weather always follows. It rained and it snowed quite a bit, just about every day. But what's really heartwarming is the people in the little towns in the South would feed the soldiers. They would put them up at gymnasiums, put them up in schools, and it was really quite heartwarming the way that people treated the soldiers. So in September 1944, what happened in Europe that's pivotal to the airborne forces? Anybody know? September 44. Somebody said it. Operation Market Garden. So the 17th left the United States in August 1944. The 17th arrived in England before Operation Market Garden, which was the 17th, the 82nd, the British 1st Airborne Division, and the Polish Airborne Brigade. The 17th was originally being considered to be involved in that, but it got there too late. So the 17th arrived in England, it went around Chilton Foliot, Swindon, and other towns, and immediately went into a training cycle, conducting battalion size and regimental size airborne operations, glider and parachute, conducting navigational heavy weapons exercises, and so on. So, 16 December 1944, what happened in Europe? The Battle of the Bulge. So the American First Army was up along the German frontier in Belgium and Luxembourg. And as a surprise to the Allies, the Germans launched Operation Watch on the Rhine, which was composed of the 6th SS Panzer Army, the 5th Panzer Army, and the 7th Army, a massive formation of 1,500 German tanks and armored vehicles, thousands of infantrymen and grenadiers. This was Hitler's last effort to win the war on the Western Front. His goal was to cut the Allies in half, separate the British from the Americans, and to drive to Antwerp and take out the sea ports, the supplies, petroleum, logistics, and all that good stuff. So on 16 December, when the Germans attacked with complete surprise, they overran elements of the 99th Infantry Division, which had a Pennsylvania connection. They overran elements of the 106th Infantry Division. The 2nd Division was hurt pretty bad, and things were looking very bleak in the 1st Army sector. So there were 4 U.S. Army divisions in reserve during the Battle of the Bulge that were not committed. The 82nd Airborne Division and the 101st Airborne Division were in France, refitting from Market Garden. They had completely been used up there. They fought until November as infantry. The 11th Armored Division, which had arrived in northern France at Le Havre. And then lastly, the 17th Airborne Division, which was in England. So things were dark and bleak on the Western Front on 16 December. And there's a map showing from north to south, just kind of a army layout, if you will. So the 82nd and 101st were sent immediately to the front. The 82nd was supposed to go to Bastogne. 101st was to go to the north. But the 101st got to Bastogne first, so the 101st assumed the role of defending Bastogne, which was a key and a critical Belgian city with a road net, 5 highways, really a strategic objective for the Germans. The 82nd went on the northern salient north of Bastogne. The 17th was alerted and began emergency flights from England to France. By the way, the 11th Armored had been driven down from Le Havre and had been chopped up really bad in the first couple days of the German invasion. And as a matter of fact, the 17th, when they got to Belgium, there were many tanks and relics of the 11th Armored Division left on the battlefield. But so the 17th began deployment from England to the continent. The weather was really, really bad, so it really delayed the flights. Out of the 14,000 men in the division, I think 600 stayed in the rear. 1,000 went by ship and ferry with the vehicles, and about 11,000 went by air. They landed in eastern France. They assembled in Charleville, eastern France. You hear a lot of rumors, you hear a lot of misinformation. The 17th never jumped into the Battle of the Bulge. They jumped off the trucks into the snow, to go to the Battle of the Bulge. But they were trucked to the front. They were trucked to the vicinity of Moray, Belgium. Richard, do you remember being in Moray, Belgium with headquarters company?
Belgium?
Yes, sir.
I was in Belgium quite a bit.
What would you tell these people about Belgium? What do you remember?
The people are beautiful. Well, I couldn't believe it.
Yeah,
We couldn't believe it.
yeah. What do you remember about the weather?
Oh, it was
Yeah.
It was cool.
It was one of the coldest winters in European history. There was a lot of snow on the ground, and I looked at some meteorological charts. It was really cold. It was 17 to 20 degrees in a lot of the places there. And
It was the coldest winter of my life.
Moray, Belgium was division headquarters where Richard would have been. And from there, I should say the 70th Airborne Division, who do you think they fought under in Belgium? What command did they fight under? Anybody know? Remember who yeah, go ahead, Ed. George Patton. The 70th Airborne Division was assigned to the 3rd U.S. Army under George Patton. So they were part of the counterattack force to relieve Bastogne. So on 4 January 1945, and let's move forward a little bit here. So this is what the terrain around the west and north side of Bastogne looks like. And this is where the 17th was deployed. The 17th was deployed. They were the left flank of the 101st Airborne Division. The 193rd Glider Infantry Regiment of the 17th was flanked on the right by the 327th Glider Infantry Regiment of the 101st Airborne Division. On the left of the 70th Airborne Division was the 87th Infantry Division and then the remnants of the 11th Armored Division. So their mission, assigned by 3rd Army, was to move north and east and cut the Bastogne Highway, which fed the German siege of Bastogne. As you know, the 101st was surrounded up until about, I believe, the 2nd of January. The town was called Flamergé. Remember that town, Richard? Flamergé? Do you remember the town of Flamergé? Dead Man's Ridge.
Oh, boy.
When you say Dead Man's Ridge,
We lost a lot of kids up there. Between the 3 divisions, airborne divisions, we must have lost at least 8,000.
Dead Man's Ridge was a nickname given to Hill 460, which was north of Flamergé, and some towns that we're going to talk about here in a minute called Renamont, Millamont, Pinsamont, and so the 17th on the 4th of January, 1945, launched their attack. So on the right is, to the right, the northern linear boundary there. You'll see 17. From there to the left boundary, that's all the 70th Airborne Division in between. Again, on the right is 101st. On the left is the 87th. So the red units represent German units. So remember this about the 70th Airborne Division. They had never been in combat. They were brand new. These were country kids and kids from villages and farms and cities, and they trained very hard. In the airborne, the airborne forces are an offensive arm. They are attack-oriented. So they have a lot of energy. And you take these young kids, and they want to engage. They want to take the enemy out. They want to serve their country, and they want to defeat and kill the enemy. So you have this airborne ethos with all these kids, and then you have the snow, you have the weather, the terrain is, as pictured earlier, the terrain in that area is mostly small hamlets of 10, 20 houses, slopes and hills and forests, small forests. And the American forces are attacking. So to the defender goes the advantage. Obviously the Germans, let's face it, were not amateurish. The German army was a formidable foe. The bad thing about where the 17th attacked was some of the best German army units. They were mechanized. There was a unit called the Führer Begleit Brigade. This was Adolf Hitler's Wehrmacht Escort Brigade. They were a mechanized brigade of hundreds of armored half-tracks with anti-tank and anti-aircraft cannons, self-propelled guns. So they were all mechanized. And here our kids are on foot. And so we're attacking an armored force with light infantry. So on 4 January, the attack started, and I think the best way to summarize this is from the 4th to the 10th. It was constant fighting, and something Richard alluded to. The 17th Airborne Division lost more casualties in an hour of combat than any other airborne division in World War II. They lost more than any division in any operation. So for 10 days, this fighting was nonstop. It was attack, retrograde, which is a tactical way of saying pull back, attack, pull back, attack, pull back. The Germans, as I said, were heavily mechanized, and our kids were fighting these, trying to fight the vehicles with pack howitzers, 75 pack howitzers, some anti-tank guns, and bazookas. And so for 10 days until 14 January, this thing went on and on. And if you go over there today, there's all kinds of evidence of the battle. All the little hamlets are pockmarked. You can really see the amount of small arms and artillery that was used in this battle. General Patton, as usual, was impatient. At one point, he even wanted to go after General Miley. And anybody know anything about General Miley? General Miley was, he knows who General Miley is. General Miley was the first commander of a United States Army Airborne unit. In World War II, he commanded the 501st Parachute Battalion. He was a West Pointer. He was a gymnast, and his men loved him. They loved him. He was tough, and he led by example. And
He was young, but he was small, but he was tough. I'll tell you that.
He was very tough, and he led by example. But General Patton was, putting pressure on him, and he was doing what he can while trying to take the objectives, while trying to save his young men. So the fighting up until the 14th resulted in the 17th basically losing one regiment, totally destroyed, that after the Battle of the Bulge was not reconstituted. The 193rd Glider Regiment was completely wiped off the map. So that glider regiment was about 2,800 men. That's just that regiment. All right. Just an image shows you the terrain there. I would think that road is a good place because it's down below the surface and it gives you a little bit of whole defilade there. On the 14th, the Glide Brigade began the withdrawal. And the 17th consolidated its positions. It moved forward up through to the Dead Man's Ridge. And at that point, the 3rd Army then began to sweep around the north of Bastogne, the 87th and 11th Armored Division. This is a kid in my hometown right here. This is Charles Gilbert. He was Company D 193rd, and he was killed on the 4th of January, 1945, which, when you look, as I said, when you look at the casualties, unbelievable the amount of casualties the 17th suffered during that. This is an image of the town of Hopefullies, and the 1st Army and the 3rd Army linked up. Once the Germans withdrew, they went north and then east, back into the German frontier, back over toward Luxembourg. And the 17th basically was in a pursuit type operation, pretty small operations. It gave a chance for the division to regroup and to prepare for the next phase. And here we go. All right, this is the town of Flamergier, and this was one of the objectives. The 3rd Battalion of the 513th Parachute Infantry Regiment actually got trapped there by the Germans, and the order was given to E&E back to the lines. So the unit had to break up into individuals and make their way back into the lines. On the right is the area today, and Richard this year was at Flamergier. There's a beautiful memorial, and the Belgian people are the... There aren't...
It's enough.
They love the Americans, and they never forgot the 17th Airborne Division. They never forgot their kids. Their kids know this stuff, and they teach their kids to, honor. And but anyway, there's a beautiful memorial there for the 17th Airborne Division in Flamergier.
A school, and the kids, there's like 260 kids going to that school, and they sang our national anthem in English. They didn't know English, but they learned how to sing it. And then the kids broke into 2 groups. One came to me, and the other one came to the other veteran, and the one little girl, 12 years old, she said, my mom and dad said I had to give you my candy bar. I said, no, honey, you eat it. She said, no, mom and dad said give it to one of the two veterans. Yeah. Well, they were beautiful people.
I was with Richard. It was just in March of this year. It seems like a long time ago. But I asked the mayor of one town, a little town called Hummel. And she had her sash on with her Belgian colors and strutting around out there. And she gave a beautiful speech, read a proclamation. They greeted the veterans. But I asked her, I said, why do you do this for the Americans? And she said, because your boys are buried all over. And they freed us from tyranny. They freed us from darkness. And so every year the Belgians have a road march. And they have the road march. They invite participants from all over Europe. And they raise money to bring back the 17th veterans. And so every year we take back a couple, the Scions take a couple back, and they get to view the battlefields, and they're treated just unbelievably well. So this is I don't know why I have the road, I did the road march, by the way, and I regretted it. I'm too old for that. But it's, by the way, they have entire families do these things. Whole families will show up with little kids, and they'll wear American flags. It's really uplifting. All right, so what happened after the 17th pursued the Germans into Luxembourg along the river there? In February 1945, late February, the 17th was drawn back to France. And there they began preparing for the largest airborne operation in World War II. How many people in here thought that Market Garden was the largest operation? How many people thought that Normandy was the largest airborne operation? Guess what? The 17th was in the largest airborne operation in World War II called Operation Varsity. And so, by the way, Charles Davis helped me prepare this 2 years ago before he passed away. So I wanted to put in a hoot for Charles. So the 17th withdrew to France. There they reconstituted, which they received replacements. They received new equipment, new uniforms. They did training. They were exposed to a new aircraft called a C-46 Commando, which carried 30 paratroopers instead of the C-47s. And they began preparing for Operation Varsity, and which we're going to talk about in depth. And because most people have never heard of it. How many had ever heard of Operation Varsity prior to this? Not a whole lot of people. And by the way, we stood at the landing zones and the drop zones this last April. It's an amazing place. So the Western Front, 1945. So what happened after the Germans retreated back into the frontier? That delayed the war. So the way the Allies were arrayed was the British Army was on the north side, and that would be General Montgomery. General Montgomery had a Canadian Army and an American Army, the 9th U.S. Army, which was General Simpson. So you had the 21st Army Group. The next army south of that, as they're approaching the Rhine, is the U.S. First Army, General Bradley. Then you had the 3rd Army with General Patton, the 7th Army, and the 1st French Army in the south. So all the armies are approaching the Rhine River, the last great natural barrier to the 1,000-year Reich. So General Montgomery, being a little bit of, any people of English extraction in here? Well, he was a little bit of a drama queen. He was a very methodical commander, and he did not like to take risks. And he wanted to make sure that all the odds were on his side. Somehow, he convinced Eisenhower that his army should bound the Rhine River and break out from the North German plains and head to Berlin. This was his plan. You can imagine General Patton's reaction to that. Wasn't pretty, it's documented. General Montgomery received support from SHAEF, Supreme Headquarters Allied Expeditionary Force, which Eisenhower, as we know, General Dwight Eisenhower oversaw. Did you ever get to meet General Eisenhower, Richard?
Yes, I did.
Tell him about it.
I was going across the Gettysburg battlefield, and I had material in my pickup truck that I was not allowed to be on that highway. And there he is, walking, he's taking his morning exercise. He had not a lawyer, but an officer driving behind him. And I got to talking to Ike, and the guy pulled up along the side and said, "That way, now."
Did you tell him you're the 70th Airborne Division and you don't move?
President Eisenhower said, "I won't use the word." Doggone it, he didn't say that. He said, "Why don't they let me alone?"
So you met him after the war.
Yeah.
Wow, what an honor. So General, Eisenhower, as we know, was a diplomatic general. He was able to somehow handle the French and the British, the Canadians, the Americans, and all the other coalition forces, the Allied forces. General Eisenhower blessed off on General Montgomery's operation. And the operation was called Operation Plunder. General Montgomery, you want to say something about him?
We didn't like him.
I don't know if you heard that. He said they didn't like him. So on the 23rd, the plan was for the British 21st Army Group to attack across the Rhine River using amphibious resources, assault boats, amphibian vehicles, whatever means. And they would attack across the area between Wesel and Hemmenkaun, Germany, which is in northwest Germany, just on and east of the Rhine River. And that force, the 21st Army Group, consisted of quite a few divisions, including the 9th U.S. Army, just south of there. And the plan was for them to get across the Rhine River on the early morning, I stand corrected, the early morning of the 24th and the late evening of the 23rd. Now, Montgomery requested an airborne operation, and this was called Operation Varsity. The original plan was to use 3 airborne divisions simultaneously: the 13th Airborne Division, the 17th Airborne Division, and the British 6th Airborne Division. Unfortunately, there was not enough airlift for the 3rd Division, so the 17th Airborne Division was selected along with the British 6th Airborne Division. Does anybody know anything about the British 6th Airborne Division? You know what they did in Normandy? They were the first, Pegasus Bridge. They were the first Allied unit to take their objective. They did a glider assault by the book at Pegasus Bridge and seized the bridge. So the plan was to drop the 17th and the British 6th Airborne Division. We're going to concentrate mostly on the 17th Airborne Division. And the plan was, and you're going to see some objectives. I'm going to show you a little film. I'm trying to do all this under 1 hour and 30 minutes for you guys. So we'll continue on to the next. How's that for high-speed stuff there, huh? So we're going to show you a short film, and I'll talk a little bit during the film. See if I can do this right. Here we go. Thank you, Tim. So this is done in
The RAF and the American 8th Air Force strike at tactical objectives beyond the Rhine. For a week preceding the Allied cross-Rhine drive, air power pulverizes Basel and other strong points. The rocket-firing Typhoons cut
Before
down
the
installations
attack.
of the Nazi defense network.
The area where they attacked is flat with small farms.
Ritual bombers over Basel. Between 22nd and 24th March, the RAF dropped 1,700 tons on troops and positions at Basel, 1,975 tons on Nazi concentrations along the northern edge of the Ruhr and at Bocholt, above Basel. On Friday night, 23rd March, just before the Allied armies begin streaming across the Rhine, the RAF Bomber Command blazes the way for the ground troops. The brilliantly clear weather holds all through the evening. Incendiaries burn out Nazi installations, which might disrupt our bridgehead operations. Dawn, 24th March, south of Paris. Paratroopers begin to assemble for the greatest single airborne operation in all history. Officers and men of the U.S. 17th Airborne Division don their gear before entering the troop carriers. The aircraft are C-47s loading 18 men, and for the first time, Curtiss Commando transports, which carry 36 paratroopers. The C-46 Commando is fitted with 2 doors and drops its shooters from both sides simultaneously. Meanwhile, at Allied bases in England, the British 6th Airborne Division begins another phase of the operations. Activities are in exact synchronization with the takeoffs of the U.S. 17th Airborne from France. Gliders jammed with equipment are ready to be hooked up to British Sterling bombers.
So this is a horse glider. A large British glider carried 30+ men.
Glider-borne Tommies get aboard for the trip to the bridgehead sector, where British commandos already have launched Marshal Montgomery's thrust across the lower Rhine. At the same time, the American glider-borne infantry is moving out of airfields in France. These units climb into the Waco or CG-4A glider. It normally carries 12 fully equipped soldiers or a combination of soldiers and equipment up to 4,000 pounds. The nylon rope is prepared for hooking the glider behind the tow ship.
These are all S-roll
Ready for the
landing
takeoff.
zones. So those are the CG-4A Wacos.
The CG-4A glider can be hauled as fast as 150 miles per hour with its full load, although normal cruising speed behind the C-47 is 120 miles per hour. All American gliders in this operation are towed in pairs.
They pulled 2 gliders for the American glider regiment. The British pulled 1 glider.
The troops taken aloft constitute the 194th Glider Infantry Regiment. From nearby French airfields, the paratroopers take off. and General Lewis H. Brereton's 1st Allied Airborne Army on their way toward the Rhine. In the same early dawn across the Channel in England, a Sterling leaves the airfield with the first British glider to go aloft in the 24th March operations.
The gliders always take air before the tow aircraft.
Two types of gliders carry the British troops' weapons and supplies. The Hamel car, which can transport a light tank of approximately 8 tons or any other equivalent load. The Horsa, which is the British standard glider and carries a load of 3 tons. Both are towed singly. Inside one of the gliders, aboard a Sterling bomber as the glider train wings its way over the British countryside. Crossing the English Channel. The rendezvous point for the British and American aircraft is near Brussels. Streaming eastward across Belgium, the two great aerial task forces total 1,600 planes, 1,400 gliders, and 40,000 troops. Over the ruins of Belgian towns. General Brereton and British officers watch the air armada wing its way toward the objective. Approaching the Rhine River, one of our aircraft lies in flames near the river's bank. Paratroopers and parapacked supplies spill out over the drop zone in the race-basal area. In this leapfrog of enemy positions east of the Rhine, the objective of the airborne divisions is first to contain the German rear and then make a quick junction with the ground troops. The C-46, caught by flak, dives toward the ground. The gliders are ready to be cut loose. At the signal, glider from tow ship, the nylon tow rope is unhitched. First glider landings without mishap. Fighters and bombers have been maintaining a protective cover over the area, which is infested with concealed flak positions. One of the crack-ups. This operation is a reversal of the Allied airborne tactics in Normandy and Holland. Here, the glider and parachute forces come in after the ground troops begin their cross-Rhine assault.
The area is very flat with small farm
Moving out
units.
against targets as mapped during the briefing sessions. Assembling squads and forming into fighting units, they spread out behind the Nazi lines. On the first day, the airborne troops capture 6 bridges across the Isle River intact.
The British
They
flew in
seized
armored
4,000
vehicles
German
and some of their
troops behind
gliders.
Their own front lines.
All right, so that's a quick summary of Operation Varsity and some things you should know about it. As I tried to put out, the area near that part of Germany is very flat, and it has farm hamlets, little hamlets everywhere. It's really unchanged today. I mean, very little change. It's amazing. The operational area was east of the Rhine River about 1.5 miles and north of the Ruhr Valley. The Ruhr Valley is the industrial heartland of Germany, the armaments production, you know, the ore and all that kind of stuff. And the reason this area was selected because it was flat and it would allow the British armored forces to break out into the North German plains. So the German defenses, the 17th was blessed in some ways, but cursed in others. There were 3 German parachute divisions that were assigned to the 1st German Parachute Army, which were aligned around Hemmenkaum. Hemmenkaum was the British objective, just a couple miles to the north of the 17th. The 17th went up against remnants of the 7th German Parachute Division. They call them Fallschirmjäger. They're really tough. They're like American paratroopers. They don't give up. And luckily, they had been hurt pretty bad during heavy fighting in Holland, and they were reduced in their combat ability. Also, the 84th Infantry Division, which was a weakened and fragmented German unit with low morale, was positioned in Wesel, Lachhauen, Fleuren, and all the area that the 17th landed in. What really hurt the 17th and the 6th was the fact that there were hundreds, I believe I read the latest estimate is 750 anti-aircraft guns. These are 20 millimeter, 37 millimeter, quad 20 millimeter, and 88 millimeter anti-aircraft guns. These are mostly Luftwaffe units. They were spread all over the area of responsibility. And you're going to see when we discuss this operation a little bit further here, when the 17th landed, the 17th didn't land near the objective and move to the objective. They didn't land at a drop zone miles from their objective. The 17th and the 6th landed on top of their objectives, on top of the farms, the defensive positions, the canals, and the woods. The first Allied Airborne Army was created in August 1944. It had the 13th, the 17th, the 82nd, the 101st, the British 1st, the British 6th, and a Polish parachute brigade assigned to it. It also had all the Troop Carrier Command aircraft squadrons under it, and the glider pilots, and all the glider units. This was formed after Holland, or actually before Holland, to allow a smoother communication and order flow for the organization. You find that if you train together, you work together every day, that you perform a lot better than if you hadn't seen these units prior to combat. The 17th Airborne Division assigned mission was by parachute and glider land north of Wesel, Germany. It was to secure the Dieforders-Wald, which is a large wooded area along the Rhine River, between the Rhine River and their landing area. And on the west side is where the British forces are coming in. And also to seize and hold multiple bridges over the Issel River Canal, which had to be held to prevent German reinforcements from attacking and interfering with the British attack. That was the actual objective, to seize the Dieforders-Wald, the woods, hold that, and then to seize the canals. This is Albert Davis from Pittsburgh. This was one of the twins that I was so lucky to be friends with for many years. Albert was probably the first soldier of the Allied Airborne Army across the Rhine River. And actually, Albert was probably the first soldier of the entire operation, including the British across the Rhine River. Albert was a little diminutive fellow, about 5'2". He had a fighting spirit. He was like a little banty rooster. He loved sports. His twin brother, they were not identical, they were fraternal. And they fought constantly. They were opposite each other. But Albert and Charles were both in the Airborne Signal Company. The British commandos attacked in the dark on 24 March. Albert volunteered to lay signal wire for the commandos to the other side. Signal wires for field phones. And what he did was the bridge, this is the Wesel Railroad Bridge. This was dropped by the Germans into the water on 10 March, 14 days before the attack. Albert, this is the west side, this is the east side. Albert volunteered to lay the wire with another soldier during the pre-dawn of 24 March into dark. He had a carbine and a roll of wire on his back, and he monkeyed his way up and down all the way across in the dark, tied off the wire on the east bank. They did that so that when the commandos get to the east bank, they can tie in their field phones immediately, and they can call for artillery. Albert said that it took them a while to get to the other side, and when they got there, he said the Germans were smoking, and they could hear them talking. He tied his wire off, so not only did he go to the east side, but then he went back to the west side. And that was all done before the British attack across the river and the airborne invasion. One of the things different about this attack is the airborne came in after the ground forces penetrated the river. They did this because they didn't want them to be cut off if the British could not cross the river, like happened in Holland, where the airborne forces were cut off, the British forces were cut off, surrounded, and destroyed. And it's really very novel and unusual for an airborne operation in World War II. So, by the way, Albert was a Rhodes Scholar, a school teacher, graduate of Slippery Rock Teachers College, and he died in New York City 2 years ago as a teacher and a coach. And the school was so enamored of him, they built a memorial for him, and really quite amazing. So here's some more pictures of the bridge, just to show you. That area of the Rhine River, I'm gonna say is 400 to 500 yards in width where this attack. Now this was taken in 21, I think, when I was over there. This is the west bank, this is the bridge support. By the way, that bridge, when it existed, was 2,700 meters long. That's almost 3 kilometers. The river width is, as I said, 500 meters. But they needed that distance to get the trains to pull the heavy loads to get a run up on the bridge. But that, we looked at it in 21. This is where Albert got up and went over the bridge. And this is covered with pockmarks from the Germans. They fired from the east bank to the west bank. And Albert said that after he got back, when the British commandos jumped in their boats and went over, the Germans opened up with everything they had. So these are the landing zones for the 70th Airborne Division. This is the Rhine River. This is the Issel River and Canal. Wesel, Germany, Hammencount, Germany is up here. The Ruhr Valley is down here on the floor. So Drop Zone W was the drop zone for the 507th Parachute Infantry Regiment and the 464th Parachute Field Artillery with 75mm pack howitzers. Landing Zone N was the glider landing zone for the 70th Airborne Division for the support units. The Engineer Battalion, the Signal Company, the Ordnance Company, the MP Platoon, the medical, and a lot of vehicles came in the Landing Zone N. Drop Zone X was the intended drop zone for the 513th Parachute Infantry Regiment. Landing Zone S, this was the landing zone for the 194th Glider Infantry Regiment. The bridges are along the canal here. The Deforder Wald is along here where the 507th landed. This is a town of Defort. When we were over there in March of this year, I was so impressed. I went up to the castle, and it's lived in by a German baron and baroness. They wouldn't let me go inside the castle and look around, but they let me look outside around the grounds. And where the 17th attacked the castle, around every window were hundreds of pockmarks where they were putting suppressive fire around the windows. And that was a German Corps headquarters that they took there. So this is what it looks like today. This is Landing Zone N. Notice how flat it is, but it also has tree lines and small areas of forest other than the Deforter Fold. This is Landing Zone S. This is a typical little farm hamlet here. You'll have a farmhouse and 2 or 3 outbuildings, and then quite a bit of land. And more shots of Landing Zone S here. And where are we at on time here? Give me a 15-minute warning, please. So at 0953, the 507th Combat Team jumped at Drop Zone W in the town of Florin. And by the way, Mr. Weaver, General Miley, the divisional commander, was in the first plane of headquarters company to jump at Drop Zone W. 1st Battalion 507th dropped at Drop Zone W, and then General Miley and his staff jumped behind them. There were 3 ways the 17th came over the Rhine River. They came by parachute, they came by glider, or they came in the vehicle trains, which I think you did. They came in the morning of the day after the invasion. They brought them over the Rhine River. So about 8,000 of the 17th troops went by air, and the remainder came over by vehicle over the Rhine River. So anyway, General Miley landed at Drop Zone W, and C-47s were used to carry the 507th and the 464th Parachute Field Artillery. If you look there, you'll see a door bundle. That's a big bundle. Not only do they drop paratroopers, they drop parapacks, they drop the howitzers for the artillery had to be broken down into 9 loads. Wheels, carriage, recoil mechanism. They would use colored parachutes, and they would drop these things and try to recover them and put them together. So that was the first drop, parachute drop, of artillery in World War II. There were many other landings by glider. So this is Gerald Kenner from Dayton, Ohio. He was a little Jewish kid. His dad was a Russian, of Russian-Jewish extraction, and they were famous for the Wright brothers in Dayton they have a produce company, and the Wright brothers had owned the building before that. And Gerald lived near us, and he would talk about the landing. He spoke Russian and Yiddish. He was an interrogator in headquarters company 507th Parachute Infantry. He landed on Drop Zone W, but landed in a tree. The area is full of fir trees, really tall fir trees. And he landed in a tree, and the British Airborne, he was worried. He was worried the Germans were going to get to him. But the British Airborne happened to cross him and cut him down, and they went into action, and they attacked a German anti-aircraft unit. And by the way, during the actual operation, it was not uncommon for British troops to be on American landing zones or drop zones or vice versa. It's called the fog of war. Confusion reigns. So I love this picture right here. This is General Miley, and this is General Miley's command element. We found this March, we found this house is still standing, and this area over here is now built up, but this is the Deforter Fold between the Rhine and their landing area. This is all the same, it hasn't changed any. But this is General Miley right here. You see his 2 stars on, he's surrounded by staff officers, and this is his command post. So, talk about exposed, look in the background. Anybody know what that is? Say it. Parachute hanging in the trees. A lot of the 507th hit the trees. Some of them never made it. The Germans would shoot them down before they could get out. This trooper here was on the front of Life magazine in April 1945. He's a 513th trooper. I think his name was Contro, but you can see he's kind of carrying a basic parachute gear and equipment, and mostly it's ammunition. Mostly what paratroopers carry is weapons and ammunition. The rations and the comfort items come last because you may not be supplied quick enough. The 513th was supposed to hit drop zone X. They jumped the C-46 Commando, which was a very large aircraft, 2 jump doors. You could drop 30 men instead of 18 from the C-47. When the 513th came in, they missed the drop zone though, because of the haze and the smoke on the ground. They ended up landing next to Hammondtown, the British landing zone. They fought their way all the way through the anti-aircraft defenses in the British zone, and they made their way to drop zone X. The sad part is the parachute battalion, artillery battalion that was following them, hit the drop zone correctly, and they had to fight as infantrymen to retrieve their guns, and they had really high casualties. This is the C-46 Commando. I'll tell you, just for information, anybody ever watch the Weather Channel? I know you watch it for the meteorologists. I do anyway. But they had a show on there called Ice Pilots. They still fly these things in Canada. They have 3 or 4 of them up there. It's amazing. So this is Bill Highfield from Dayton. Bill was a machine gunner in the 513th Parachute Infantry Regiment, 3rd Battalion. Bill was, he was quite a character. He said that he spent more time in the brig than he did free. Every time they got in, a battle was coming about, the platoon leader would come down and get him out of the brig to go into battle. And after the war, he was a policeman, he was a dancer, he was a boxer, and he ended up being a liquor salesman. He was a great guy. He was one of the jumpers on drop zone X-ray. This is Bill Smith from Philadelphia. And Bill was 466 Parachute Field Artillery, and his daughter was for years was really involved in our organization. Unfortunately, she passed. But they were able to retrieve their howitzers, and they jumped, I believe they dropped 8 howitzers, and they brought in extra ones by glider in case they couldn't retrieve the ones they paradropped. So this is landing zone S. This is where the 194th Glider Infantry Regiment. Notice this is a 194th trooper, but see the horse and glider there? He's missed his landing zone, or they're on the wrong landing zone. These are American CG-4As. Many of those gliders landed right on the canal. Their noses were over the banks where their objectives were the bridges. And immediately after landing, all of these units had to fight 360 degrees. The Germans were in all the hamlets. They had defensive fortifications. As I said, they had 750 anti-aircraft guns. 78% of the gliders were not usable after this operation. And there's the CG-4A. It could carry a Jeep. It could carry a pack howitzer. It could carry an anti-tank gun, a trailer, any one of those, or it could carry 13 infantrymen. And the 194th, as we mentioned, they towed 2 at a time with men only. The ones pulling the vehicles only carried 1. Charles Davis, the other twin, landed in a Jeep on landing zone N. He and 3 other troopers were in the Jeep. Charles said that he was a T3. He said, I felt so embarrassed. We started to hear small arms fire hit the bottom of the Jeep. I was worried about the gas tank blowing, so I started throwing up. I took my helmet off, I threw up my helmet, and then as we landed, I realized, oh my God, I need my helmet on. So he put his helmet back on, and he said that he felt that the men never respected him the same way again after that. He was an amazing guy. This is Calvin Bollinger from I Company 194th. Calvin was in the 550th Airborne Battalion. He fought in North Africa, he fought in Italy, he fought in the Battle of the Bulge. His battalion became the 3rd Battalion, the 194th Glider Regiment. He served with Clinton Hedrick from West Virginia, who was awarded the Medal of Honor for his actions at Limbeck Castle on 28 March, 4 days after the invasion. And Calvin was with him when his buddy was killed. So tomorrow morning when we leave here, we're going to drive through West Virginia. We're going to find his memorial in a little town called, what's it called, Tom? River Cherry. We got to look it up on the map, but we're going to go by and we've got a rock from the castle that he fought at, and we brought it back from Germany, and we're going to put the rock on his stone. This is Louis Palmquist from Iowa. He was killed in the 680th Field Artillery Battalion on the landing zone. This is Patty's father, Thomas Miller. Very, sorry about that, Patty. If you look at, I see the resemblance every time I see Patty. He was in Headquarters Company, 2nd Battalion, 194th Glider Infantry Regiment. He was a messenger. You know what those guys do? They run for their lives every time they leave the command post. They're carrying messages. Not only did you use radio and semaphore and other techniques, but messengers were very common in World War II. Was he from Harrisburg? Patty? I'm sorry? Scranton, all right. He landed on landing zone S. This is just an artist's depiction. He kind of put all the elements in there for drama. This is William Wolford from Kentucky. He was a mortar squad leader. He landed on landing zone S. He received the Bronze Star for valor. This is where the divisional support units landed on landing zone N, as I mentioned. Here's the interesting thing about the pack artillery that landed. How do you think, what normally is used to pull artillery pieces? What? Horses in many years ago. In World War II, prime movers being trucks or jeeps. Well, guess who pulled the pack howitzers in Operation Varsity? The men, because their jeeps were not, they couldn't airdrop the jeeps. They could only bring the jeeps in by glider. So after the operation, the jeeps married up with the howitzers. But during the operation, they had little towing kits, and they would tow these howitzers all over the drop zones and landing zones. This is my great uncle, Kenneth Short of Pound, Virginia. We are proudly Virginians, by God. And I'll tell you, there's a lesson from Kenneth here. I never got to meet Kenneth. Kenneth died before I ever found out he was in the 17th Airborne Division. And so if you have family members that you think served in the service, you need to get them interviewed. You need to get it all written down or taped for posterity. You really have to do that. He was a career soldier. He did 20 years in the Army, and he moved out to Oregon. He was in the Engineer Battalion that landed on landing zone N. These are the Davis twins I've talked about all night. This is Albert, and this is Charles. I might as well tell you this story. You'll notice Charles has some rank, all of his decorations. Well, when they were getting ready to go overseas, Albert, being the impulsive one, said, I'm going to sneak back to Pittsburgh. I'm going to see Mom and Dad. Charles said, no, you're not. You're not doing that. They both were NCOs. Well, Albert sneaks off. What do you think happens? The company has a formation, and the captain wants to know where one of the Davis twins is at. So Charles calls back home to Pittsburgh. Their father answers the phone. He was a World War I veteran. And Charles said, is Albert there? And Dad said, yeah, he's home on leave. And Charles let the cow out of the barn. He said, no, he's not, Dad. He's AWOL. So the story is Dad grabbed Albert by the ear. They took him to the bus station and got him bused immediately down to Camp McCall. And when Albert arrived back, they had a formation. They had Albert come out in front of the formation. They stripped his jump wings. They said, you lost your jump pay. He lost his NCO rank. And he said, you're going to the wire section now. You have to carry the spools of wire. So they interrogated Charles heavily to find out where Albert was at. One of the things that Charles said cleverly to the captain was, "I'm not my brother's keeper." It didn't go over very well. And by the way, they went to Berlin together. So I think this is amazing, the planning that was involved in this operation. 1 hour after the last glider landed, the parachutists landed and then the gliders, almost simultaneously. But 1 hour after the last glider landed, 200 B-24s flying at 200 feet from the 8th and 9th Air Force dropped supplies and logistics, ammunition, food, medical. This was all predetermined. They were determined they were not going to commit any other errors they'd committed in the past during airborne operations. Charles was watching. He said he saw one fly over. It got hit, and the kid that was in the door throwing out the bundles was thrown from the aircraft and landed not far from him, and it killed him instantly. It's something he never forgot. But they lost 20 of those aircraft. So they lost 10%. So these are, this is Calvin Bollinger, who we showed you earlier. This is Charles Davis, one of the chipmunk variation of the twins. He'd get mad when we show this picture because he thought he put on too much weight. This is Jerry Cantor, the 507th, and this is Bill Highfill from the 513th. Every one of those guys is gone now. In our association, we have about 29 veterans left alive out of, the thousands that went through the division and the members, but we're down to about 29 now. But we have lots of sons and daughters and grandsons and whatnot. These are the Davis twins. That's Charles on the left. Now look, he's hugging on Albert there. There's Albert on the right. From Pittsburgh, from actually a suburb of Pittsburgh called Mount Lebanon. Anybody ever been there? Oop. So this is one of our members on, his name is Jerry O'Brien. He lives in Maryland. He's an attorney, a retired attorney, but his father was John O'Brien, and he never got to meet his father because his father was killed on Drop Zone X-ray X at Vasel. He was a parachute field artillery officer, and he was trying to retrieve a machine gun bundle, and he was shot down and fell there. And so in 1947 in Boston, this is Jerry. He's now a vice president of our association, but this is Jerry in 1947 in Boston, and the city of Boston put a memorial sign there for him. That thing was under a lot of wear and tear here in the last couple of years, and the Scions petitioned the city of Boston, and they replaced it with a new one. So all over America, these memorials are everywhere, not only for the 17th, but for soldiers from all wars, all units, etc. So the casualties there, 1,519 KIA, MIA, and WIA, that is just for Operation Varsity. That's not for the whole war. So the division had about 13,000 men at its height. It lost about 8,000 men during the course of the war. So it almost turned itself over. So why do we do this? Why are we here tonight? Are we here to torture ourselves and drive 7.5 hours to look at the beautiful Pennsylvania countryside? Well, maybe if we were older, but we're here so that people know about these guys. They know about what they did, that you can take an innate pride in the 70th Airborne Division. As I said, this is truly a Pennsylvania Airborne Division. General Gavin from the 82nd, by the way, was from Pennsylvania. But let me tell you what happened after Operation Varsity. So they landed on 24 March. The war ended on 7 May. By then, they were placed around the Ruhr Valley in security operations. In the summer of 1945, the Army had a point system. The higher points, you went home. The lower points, you stayed overseas. The 70th Airborne Division was basically sent to Berlin under the 82nd Airborne Division. Most of the members of the 17th went to Berlin or were on their way to Japan when the war ended. And the victory parade in January 1946 down Fifth Avenue, New York, if you look at the units marching, you'll see a lot of 17th combat patches. So the 17th went from Camp McCall, North Carolina, to Berlin for occupation for 4 months, and then to New York for discharge. And this is a beautiful memorial that stands at Wesel, Germany. This was commemorated this year on March 24th, the anniversary of Operation Varsity. You're thinking, how the heck did they do that in Germany? Well, an American owns the chateau, the land. It was the command post for one of the regiments of the 17th during the air landing. He said, by gosh, you put that memorial on my property. And so that is the 70th Airborne Memorial. It's one of the only U.S. Army World War II memorials in Germany. And there's a lot of reasons for that, but let's just say that it's one of the only memorials in Germany for the U.S. Army. And it's beautiful. It took a lot of people, a lot of time and effort. The really neat thing is the granite comes from Belgium, which is symbolic of the 17th liberating Belgium. A Belgian stonemason completed that. It did incredible work. Mr. Weaver was there at the memorial. And so we're at the end of this. Richard, how are we on time? Where are we at? So we're 3 minutes off. All right. Mr. What would you like to say to them about the memorial in Wesel?
Is that up in Bastogne?
That's the one at Wesel.
Wesel?
Yes, that you were at the chateau.
Yeah. Yeah.
And do you want to tell them how you came across the Rhine River during Operation Varsity?
I went to my captain the night before. They fed us really a good meal. We knew something was up. I went down to my captain and I said, let me jump in tomorrow. He looked at me and said, you're not going anywhere. I need you. I can't afford to lose you. I kept after him. About an hour later, I had him agreeing to let me jump in. The next morning I got up. I don't know how I got to the airfield. I got there and a couple guys are standing there waiting to get their chutes, paratroopers. And they said, what outfit are you with? I told them. He said, what the hell are you doing here? I said, my captain's gonna let me jump in. He said, better you and us. Well, anyhow, next thing I hear is my captain. Weaver, get over here and now. And that's an order. I went over to his Jeep and I said, but sir, last night you told me, he said, I told you to shut up. I don't want to hear one word out of you. I kept yapping away at him. And finally he said, get in this Jeep now and shut up. I jumped in the Jeep and we took off. He said, you want to go in? You want to see some action? We're going to see it in about 20 minutes. We did.
He went across on one of the pontoon bridges that were put up after the invasion. Now, the parting words for these people, what do you want to say about the 17th Airborne Division? Last thing tonight. What do you want to say?
I couldn't hear you.
What would you like to say about the 17th Airborne Division? The last thing to tell these fine folks.
Beautiful outfit. Yep.
Beautiful outfit. So
General Malley had us on the ball. One day, before we even started basic training, because we had to wait till they got the TO filled up to start basic training. TO
Table
of
organization.
organization.
Yeah.
And boy, what a mess.
He was a master sergeant, by the way. You
What's
were a
that?
master sergeant, correct?
Pardon?
You were a master sergeant?
No,
No?
just a tech sergeant.
Oh, somebody told me you were a master sergeant. No? Okay. So, anyway, what else?
I ended up being a tech sergeant, and I told my boss one day, I said, there's something wrong with this picture. I said, I'm running a show, but I'm only a tech sergeant. We got 2 master sergeants sitting there doing nothing. And he said, I said something to General Gavin about it. Gavin said, you tell Rich there's nothing we can do. All promotions were out of the ordinary.
Wow.
Yep.
Well, that concludes our presentation of how many people here have family members that were the 17th? And I know who you are. Your uncle was in the 139th Engineer Battalion, no? What's your name? Oh, wow. Well, there you go. So how many, 3 of you guys? So, anybody else? All right, that concludes our presentation. I'd like to give Mr. Weaver a hand, please. Thank you, Mr. Weaver.